Hello, everyone. This is an open Citizen Assembly meeting. I'm Stacy Gustafson, your host, and with me today is Dan Bader, retiree of the Chicago Department of Health, and he is going to discuss today feedback loops between human needs and emotion management. I am going to start screen sharing his slide deck here, and then he will get started. Thank you very much, Dan. Go ahead.
Okay, so all right, well, we're there at, if you could go up to the number 2 slide to start off, Stacy, that'd be great. Okay, so again, I'm going to just review very quickly a little bit about diagnosis. So again, most people think a psychiatric diagnosis signifies a disease or a chemical imbalance in the brain, which needs to be corrected by medication and or therapy. And what I'm proposing is a better way to understand most mental health disorders is as a combination of an individual's coping skills, the state of their physical health, and the socioeconomic health of the community. So could you just move down to go down, I think, right to this slide, the one that has the 5-axis layout there, axis 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's number 5. It's slide number 5, Stacy. Thank you. Okay. So this is the system of diagnosis that was utilized by the psychiatric Bible, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, up until 2013. From 1980 through 2013, this was the conceptual framework. And I'm just going to go over it briefly because it's very relevant to what I'm going to discuss. So we have 5 axes. Axis 1 is signs and symptoms. That's when a patient reports, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling, I'm in a rage, I'm having suicidal ideation, I'm hearing voices. It could be many different things. It's axis 1 in the old system, and it's still ongoing today. In the DSM-5, which came out in 2013, they still use an axis 1. They just only have now 3 axes. They pretty much got rid of axis 4, axis 5, and kind of changed axis 3 in a significant way. But it's still there as far as axis 1 goes. So axis 1 is the axis that determines a person's main diagnosis, and it's also what determines insurance payments. If you don't have a diagnosis that's an axis 1 diagnosis, you would not be reimbursed for your services by insurance. So again, it's signs and symptoms. Signs are just things you can actually see. The person is crying, that's a sign. The person says, I'm heartbroken, that's a symptom. Now, if we go down and we look at axis 3, which is medical diagnoses, and of course, since it's me doing the presenting in this slide deck, medical diagnoses could include things like, coronary heart disease, cancer, diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just kind of emphasizing here, it also can include nutritional deficiencies, particularly micronutrient deficiencies, blood sugar dysregulation issues, hormonal imbalances, and, macro diet problems, where people are eating very inflammatory foods constantly. All of these things can lead to symptoms on axis 1. So if you have micronutrient deficiencies, vitamin, mineral deficiencies of various sorts, you can start to feel anxious, you can start to feel depressed, you can start to feel, angry. You could even, in a few unusual cases, you might even start to have auditory hallucinations to people who might be very vulnerable. So the point that I'm making is that if you have problems on axis 3, this can lead to symptoms on axis 1. And in a decent mental health system, you would, of course, try to factor out any nutritional problems or hormonal imbalances before you would start people taking medication. And I went over the medication stuff last week, and I'm not going to touch that today. But now let's look at axis 4, because this is what I'm going to kind of hone in on. These are psychosocial environmental stressors. I wrote down there, financial instability, poor emotional support, inadequate community involvement, and a lack of individual development activities in one's life. Sometimes, somebody else might want to put, well, the person's having marital problems, they have legal problems, etc. Axis 4, these psychosocial / environmental stressors will cause a person to have symptoms on axis 1. So it's really regrettable that in 2013, they basically kind of took away this framework. Actually, I suspect they did it because it was just too logical in terms of, being able to understand what's going on. There were many, many complaints about it from, professionals. But anyway, they did it. But this is a decent framework to understand what's happening. And so you notice in the arrow, I basically say that, axis 3 and axis 4 can cause you to have these symptoms up on axis 1. And the symptoms and the signs on axis 1 are usually what people understand as that's a mental health disorder or disease, but really it's not. Anything up on axis 1 can't be tested in terms of blood work. There's no imaging to show you have this diagnosis or that diagnosis. So they call mental health, at least in the DSM, they call them disorders rather than diseases. Okay, so we're going to go now to, if you could go down, Stacy, to where we start discussing the need areas. That'll be kind of down there. We're going through the emotions, which we, okay, there's anxiety. Yeah, just keep going because I want to get to the need areas. That should be coming up after the boundary setting. Okay, all right, we're good right there. So go up a little bit. Okay, stop right there where it's financial instability. Number 36, let's go to 36. Okay, so in terms of human needs that we all have as human beings, I break it down into 4 different areas. Obviously, each area could be sliced and diced, and you could get finer definitions of what's happening. But in reality, by keeping it limited to 4 areas, it's much easier for people to kind of understand conceptually what the challenge is. So here we have the first human need area. And again, just to quick, where does this come from? This is just, it's basically what I call the unconscious mind is concerned with survival. It's concerned that we have our material needs met. obviously, food, water, shelter is very important. So I say financial material stability is in place if you and your family, if you have a family, can reliably obtain the necessities of life. It's there. If the unconscious perceives that the preservation of material stability is at stake, it will generate chronic emotional pain, usually a combination of anxiety and frustration, anger. So let's look. So somebody is living, let's say, in a near poverty or a poverty neighborhood or area. It's very likely that they're going to have financial material instability. They may not have enough money, income coming in order to take care of the necessities. If that is the case, then they're going to be experiencing considerable chronic emotional pain. It could be anger, frustration, anger, which I'm listing here. Could be anxiety, fear of what's going to happen to me and my family. It could also involve sadness, shame, as further negative feelings. But I want to show how this works. So we're going to just look at the anxiety and the frustration, anger. Now, if you can remember, you don't need to go back to it, but when I was looking at the 5 axes, and up on axis 1, where you have the symptoms, and this is from axis 4, somebody is suffering from poverty, near poverty, financial, material instability. That's going to cause things to happen up on axis 1. Like the person's going to be very anxious, and they're going to have maybe some anger management issues because they're constantly frustrated by the deprivation. So not having financial material stability causes symptoms up on axis 1. Now, if a person doesn't know how to manage their emotions, and almost all of the symptoms that you get on axis 1 are either directly issues of emotion management or indirectly. Everything will be connected. So what happens is somebody's living in this kind of a circumstance. They're having a lot of symptoms. Now, if they go into the mental health system, they're going to get a diagnosis. They'll be given some medication and maybe some therapy and maybe a little case management. But if they don't know how to manage emotions, which theoretically they could learn in therapy, because most therapeutic systems and theories are going to reduce in one way or different language, different ways of putting it together, but it's going to boil down to, can you manage emotions well or not? And so let's say that a person is in this kind of a situation. They don't know how to manage anxiety. They don't know how to manage anger. Well, what does that mean? It means that they're probably not going to be able to alter their situation very easily. If someone has an anger management problem, it makes it very, very difficult to, for example, let's say, get a job, hold a job. It makes it very, very difficult to get along with people. Anybody who has a low frustration tolerance and then gets angry can have many problems, even getting training. So if you have a problem on axis 4, in this case, financial material stability, you don't have that, it's unstable. you're going to have symptoms up on axis 1. Now, it may take a period of time to correct the financial material instability. You probably have to do some planning, get some assistance, etc. There's all sorts of ways to improve a situation. But you have to be able to manage your emotions in order to get the result you want in terms of the environmental improvement. So what happens is in many, many situations, a person does not learn how to, let's say, manage anger or anxiety. So Stacy, if you could go up to the very nearer to the beginning where we start with the emotions, let me just quickly review anger and the management of anger, because that's going to be very much connected with people who live in very deprived environments. Okay, so if you could put up the anger slide. Okay, so here is the emotion of anger laid out in a diagram, which is pretty much on the money if you think about it. So we have at the top of the diagram, we have the stimuli that cause a person to become angry. And again, I've broken it into 5. People can break it down further. It's not a problem. But what we have up there is we have frustration, we have physical discomfort, we have disrespect, we have unfairness, and we have loss. So any of these individually or in combination give rise to a feeling of anger. Give rise to other emotions too, but here, anger. Now, what does anger basically want us to do? I'm going to, again, a good way to understand it is it's going to make us express our feeling, in this case, the anger, in what I would call a disrespectful manner. Because anger is really an emotion which in its purest form prepares the body to launch a physical attack or to defend oneself from being attacked. It jacks up the adrenaline and it causes a lot of other changes to the body. Now, in the diagram, we see off on the angles, the thoughts, the 2 thoughts that come. One is whoever or whatever you're angry at is all bad, all wicked, and deserving of retaliation and justice, or however the person is thinking about it at a given point in time. And it also takes away the fear of consequences. So you're not going to be afraid to express your anger. Now, in reality, of course, if a person is very, very anxious and afraid, that could knock down the anger. But the anger usually, generally speaking, unless the person has really good reason to be very afraid, it will take away the fear and allow the person to attack in a disrespectful fashion. And I define what I mean by a disrespectful expression of anger: violence, threats of violence or abandonment, and attacking a person's identity. Their identity as a man or a woman, their gender identity, their racial identity, their ethnicity, their appearance, their intelligence, all things that go into a person's identity. When a person becomes angry, a lot of times they'll launch a verbal attack on the person's identity. Threats of violence can be verbal or nonverbal. A person can say, if you don't shut up, I'm going to put your lights out, or some very direct threat to go violent. It can also be nonverbal. A person can simply slam their arm down on a table to show the other person that they're about to lose it. They're getting very near to physical violence. They can go ahead and pick something up and throw it in the other direction of the person. They can yell at the top of their lungs, like a dog growling or barking, letting you know, listen to my voice. I'm so angry, I may attack you. So we're going to define that in terms of mental health. You can't go around and express your anger in a disrespectful way very often. It can because it's instinctive, it can happen, but you have to be prepared to cut it off as fast as you can and to apologize to the person for losing it. But ideally, it would not happen at all. But it is instinctive, so it's hard to control. And the history of civilization, if you look at it, I forget what, I think the guy's name was Norbert Elias. He was a sociologist. He wrote a lot about violence and civilization, and how people had to develop manners and change their habits. You couldn't just urinate in somebody's home, that kind of thing. You had to not fight with other people for food over the table, some of the things that used to happen. But as we've become in advanced societies, more civilized, things have changed. But the anger itself is very, very powerful, and it wants to be expressed in what I'm defining as a disrespectful way. A respectful expression of anger addresses the frustration, disrespect, or unfairness that has triggered the anger. In order to manage anger, you have to learn to express it in a respectful way. Now, so if we look at what happens in reality in, let's say, a very deprived neighborhood, people usually try to dampen their anger down. Some people do by taking drugs, smoking, eating comfort food. There's a lot of things people can do to try to keep their anger down. Unfortunately, there's a lot of consumption of alcohol, and alcohol will not inhibit anger in any way, shape, or form. It actually disinhibits it. And likewise, if a person is using stimulating drugs in cocaine or amphetamine, this will not inhibit anger. It will disinhibit it, depending on the context. So if we look at it, if you're living, or maybe you just suddenly, your fortune has changed, you lost your job, you've lost your benefits, and now you find yourself in a very financially unstable situation, and you are experiencing anger and anxiety, which I'm going to go to in a second. And you don't know how to manage the anger. What are you going to, what's going to happen? Are you going to take it out on, if you have a family, your family? If you have a partner, your partner? What are you going to do with the anger if you don't know how to manage it? It will come out in a disrespectful fashion. And there's other things that factor in because if you've already been socialized for example, in Chicago, we have very large street gang activity going on throughout many, many areas of the city. If you grow up in one of those neighborhoods, not only will you probably have all sorts of reasons to get angry, but your anger will be socialized to be disrespectful in the first place. In other words, if somebody looks at you the wrong way, punch them in the face. If somebody insults you, take a baseball bat or worse and beat them up. Now, if so, in many situations we have in a community, not only the issue of learning to manage anger, but we also have to learn that there's been a socialization so that if you don't express your anger in a disrespectful way, you're going to feel shame because, what are you, a coward? You let the person look at you the wrong way and you didn't do anything, that kind of thing. And that's a reality on the ground. And it's oftentimes very overlooked. So there has to be a certain kind of education around this. And then there has to be practice in the management of anger. Now, if we go down to the other emotion that is going to happen if we're in a financially unstable situation, most frequently, that would be anxiety. So that should be maybe the fourth emotion down there. I think we do sadness. We're going by. There's anxiety right there. Okay. So if you put up the anxiety emotion, Stacy, I'll go over it. Okay. So we have anxiety. Again, at the top, a future threat of pain. Could be physical pain, could be emotional pain. A physical threat of pain, a future threat of pain will give rise to anxiety. And what does anxiety want us to do? It wants us to avoid or escape the threat. Better safe than sorry kind of logic of this emotion. And it gives us two kinds of thoughts in order to facilitate that action, to escape or avoid. It gives us catastrophic thoughts like, it's a nightmare. It's unbelievably horrible. And it also gives you inefficacy thoughts, which are non-coping thoughts, essentially. It's too much for me. I can't deal with it. It's a nightmare and I can't handle it. That is to encourage you. If it's something that's a nightmare and you can't manage it, then it's a good idea to avoid it, right? I mean, that just, in emotional common sense is the way it goes. So we have to, why don't you put up the next slide right after the diagram, Stacy, number 20. Okay, and it's just to, again, it's the emotion we feel in response to future threats. Anxiety urges us to avoid or escape the threat. It generates automatic thoughts of potential catastrophic outcomes and a belief that a bad outcome would be unbearable. The emotion wants us to avoid or escape a threat of emotional or physical pain. It wants us to err on the side of safety. When we decide to avoid a threat, we usually experience immediate relief because we're doing the same way. If you go into a rage and you beat somebody up, there'll be a little moment there where you're going to probably feel pretty damn good. That's how people react. Yeah, I showed him or her, that kind of thing. But then, of course, once you're past that point, now the anger will start to subside, and you might now start to have a good sense of what the consequences are for you. But you've done the deed, and now it's too late in terms of the consequences if you ever, get in a rage and attack somebody. So anxiety is, so let's move down to slide 21, for managing anxiety. Okay, so this is just basically just in because of time, kind of time considerations a little bit. Here's what happens with anxiety. You have to be able to know, if you want to manage it, whether the threat is avoidable or not. It's a really important factor. Now, a lot of threats are avoidable. Some threats aren't really avoidable. Let's look at, a common threat. maybe somebody is feeling very nervous about, say a job interview or something of that nature. That what are they afraid? Well, in that situation, they're afraid of emotional pain. They may get rejected. They may embarrass themselves, feel some shame, embarrassment in the interview context. So what they can do is they can just simply not go to the interview. They can avoid it and get that initial feeling of kind of relief. But the problem, let's look at it in the context of the need for financial material stability. Maybe you need to get a job if you're capable in order to remove the financial instability. But if you avoid it because you don't want to go to the interview because you're afraid of the emotional pain that may hit you, now you're not going to be able to improve your situation. And you're going to continue to have anxiety over how am I going to get by? What am I going to do? And the anger, frustration, it's not right. We shouldn't have to live like this, etc. But the anxiety, now anxiety is a symptom up on axis 1. You get diagnosed. If you couldn't go to that job interview and you came into a mental health professional, they might give you an anxiety disorder. That's your problem. You have an anxiety disorder. And they might offer some medication, just to simply anesthetize the feeling that you would, have if you didn't take the medication. They could also maybe get you into some therapy where you might learn strategies to manage the anxiety. But that's what is going to be considered. And if you don't learn to manage the anxiety and the anger and the other emotions too, you're going to continue to have those symptoms up on axis 1, and you're not going to improve your situation in terms of removing that financial material instability. And it's difficult for people because of the way our culture has presented mental health to understand that if you want to have mental health in this situation, you have to get your financial material stability in place. There's different ways you could do it. You could, if you're spending too much money, you could budget in a more intelligent way to remove the instability. But if you're in a situation, or you could, get more income by working or other means. But the thing is, if you're in a situation where it's going to take some time, maybe somebody needs to go into a training program in order to get a certificate to be able to get an employment opportunity. You can't get rid of the instability overnight. And you're going to feel chronic anxiety and frustration, anger, until that need area is fixed up. So that could take some time. So during that time frame, while you're, trying to improve things, you'd better be able to manage your anxiety. So you go to the job interview if that's a problem. And that you don't have anger outbursts with people, which make potential employer or, somebody in the family who knows somebody who could hire you not want to take you on because you have a reputation for having a short fuse. So there's a feedback between the axis 1 symptoms, in this case, anxiety and anger, frustration, and whether you're going to be able to improve your environmental situation. Now, if and by the way, here's the thing with I'll tangent a little bit because it's relevant to the world we're living in right now. so when you think about management of anxiety and what anxiety, again, it's the better safe than sorry emotion. It really wants you to avoid or escape something that seems like it's a nightmare, and also that you don't have the capacity to deal with it. Because if you can't avoid it, so somebody's living in poverty, there's no easy way out right away. They have to be able to manage the anxiety of maybe I'm not going to have enough money to live on at the end of the month. How do you do that? It's really important for that person. You need to not go out, get drunk, buy some drugs with a little money you have, get high, and forget about it for a while. What you need to do is you need to imagine yourself in that situation where, yeah, it's the end of the month, the last week of the month, and you're out of money. And it's pretty tough for you. And if you have loved ones that are dependent on the money, it can really be stressful. But you have to imagine yourself being able to cope with it. If you go back to the anxiety diagram, up there, 19. So thinking that you can't cope with what's coming at the end of the month is going to be a problem. Because you really can't escape maybe that happening. It's kind of baked in, perhaps. Certainly could happen. So you need to be able to tell yourself, I can cope with it. This is what I'll do. If I have to, maybe I can go borrow a little bit of money. Maybe I could find some other way of earning a little bit of money, et cetera. That's how I'll cope with it. And if I have to go without for a week, I'll go without. I can deal with that. I don't like it. It hurts, but I can deal with it. That's starting to script coping thoughts to get you through a situation that's not that easy to avoid, at least in an adaptive way. And so again, somebody who's living in a situation where they're experiencing chronic emotional pain, that will give you those symptoms up on axis 1, get you a psychiatric disorder diagnosis, and get you access to medication and maybe therapy and some case management, which could be good. But if you go into therapy, you're going to have to, it takes a while, especially with a lot of the way things, practices go, to be able to learn what you really have to learn. You need to learn how anxiety works, how to manage it very quickly, if possible, and to start your practicing and scripting for yourself how you're going to manage the threat if it gets you. Now, today, we have a lot of threats looking, for example, we have this COVID-19, the vaccinations, et cetera, going on. And, the way that this was rolled, the whole thing was rolled out in the beginning. And I'll just quickly mention my own subjectivity in terms of it. So I had, as I've mentioned before, when I was working for the Chicago Department of Public Health, I was part of what we used to call kind of the bioterror team. And that was, essentially trying to make plans in case there was a bioterror attack in the city of Chicago. And I was there as kind of a mental health person who had different kinds of functions depending on circumstances. But I got tuned into the issue of biowarfare and a so-called bioterror attack. And that started back in, I don't know, 2009, I think, is when we got the federal money for that. But the thing is, I've always been kind of tuned into it. So when this whole COVID-19 exploded at the end of 2019, and I'm a person who I listen to corporate media you know, ABC, CBS, not all of them, but at least one of them every day, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, you know, the usual suspects. Now, but I also go into, you know, a lot of alternative media, which is not so tightly controlled and scripted in a certain way. So I knew from what I was seeing in Wuhan, China in the beginning, it really seemed, and some people who were very expert in bioterror were already saying that it's very likely this escaped or was released purposefully from the Wuhan Biosafety for Virology Laboratory in Wuhan, China. Much more likely that's what was happening rather than, you know, it came in one of those open markets and jumped from species to humans. Now that was out there, and that made me very, very anxious because, you know, a bioweapon could be relatively mild, but it could also be very, very toxic, you know, kind of the difference between, you know, a cold, something which is equivalent to maybe a cold or the flu, and something which is, you know, smallpox toxic. You know, there could be various kinds of, now, and I also knew, you know, they have the technology to be able to alter viruses, you know, to essentially genetically splice things. So at the very beginning of this, you know, I can't call it an event, this kind of nightmare, I was very concerned. And they were showing, you know, stuff was coming out of Wuhan, China. People were supposedly just dropping over. They were dragging people out of their homes, putting them in these temporary camps. And it made me feel like, oh my God, this is really a serious, serious threat. And then it got, you know, and then of course, the hysteria started in the media. And, you know, so I myself in the very beginning felt like, yeah, if this is a bio attack, that's something which, wow, man, that is a nightmare, right? Catastrophic thought. That's a nightmare. And then the inefficacy thoughts. Oh my God, you know, that's more than any of us could take, you know, that kind of thing. So the way I managed that, so I was experiencing great anxiety, possibly more than a lot of other people, because most people didn't think, and most people don't think today that was likely COVID-19 is part of a bio warfare kind of a attack, or it's an accident. It just, you know, and of course, most people don't realize that we have lots of laboratories like this in the United States and elsewhere in the world. It's not regulated. It's potentially, it can be as dangerous as, you know, a nuclear war. And it's not, it's just, it's a very, anyway. So I had all this anxiety, and the way I managed it was by telling myself, okay, I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to, you know, I will, you know, use the wipes. I will be very, very careful, the mask, everything. You know, be careful of where I am. I was doing everything I could to avoid getting what I thought was a serious virus. Now, as time started to go on, I started to get information that told me, well, it doesn't really seem that dangerous. You know, I mean, there came a point where they were starting to issue information such as, you know, the most people who are going to die from this or have to be, in intensive care, it's somebody over, sometimes they'd say 70, sometimes 75, with an average of 2.5 pre-existing conditions. So that meant most people aren't in that grave of a danger. When I started to understand that, my anxiety level came down quite a bit. But again, to show you, so in the very beginning of February, because I had worked with the bioterror people, I went over to the what they call, well, they changed, it's now called emergency preparedness. I went to the emergency preparedness building in Chicago, and I said, I'll be happy to volunteer to help out with this. And basically, so in my mind, what I played in my mind is, that's what I think it would be useful for me to do. Kind of in a way, let me be a little bit of a hero here. Let me volunteer, as part of it psychologically. But at the same time, I went ahead and did it. And the way I meant, it was just basically, I'm doing what I think is the right thing. If I get sick and I die, well, then that's what I'll do. And I could imagine basically, on my deathbed saying goodbye to whoever was around me. That's in a way coping. Those are coping fantasies with the danger. And so I manage that anxiety, and what I've seen happen is that this situation has become one where the entire society is very, very anxious, to a point where there's lots of avoidance going on. And people are not really able to understand what's at play. And so, if you want to manage the anxiety over COVID-19, first of all, you have to have the information that's relevant to the threat. If you think the threat is something like I did in the very beginning, that if you get infected by it, you just drop over, like I saw people in China. That's scary, seeing what they showed you coming out of Wuhan. But as time has gone on and information has become available, it's not that same kind of threat. So to manage anxiety, we have to understand and define what the threat is at a given point in time. So again, today, I still have anxiety about COVID-19 because I'm aware that the fact that this is it's highly probable this is a modified coronavirus, and probably even the SARS-1 and the MERS virus from 2001, 2003, I forget exactly when, but those were coronaviruses. And for a long time, people have been thinking about, could we get a vaccine for a coronavirus? And that was, they couldn't do it. It wasn't safe. So, but a coronavirus, which is kind of the shell of what you're getting infected with, had probably things spliced into it that could be somewhat damaging and could trigger off the immune system to attack more than it should. So as time has gone on, I've learned that the threat has changed. And in response to that, I've been able to, in a much easier fashion, manage the anxiety. But with the introduction of the vaccinations has, again, it's my anxiety right now about the vaccinations is reasonably high, because I don't, for reasons where I don't have time to, I guess, really go into it, but I believe that the vaccinations themselves are very problematic. And
And
that,
Dan, I'm just going to interrupt for a second and say we did cover that. We called it elites and depopulation, I believe, as part of the title, and people can go back and find that. So thank you. Go ahead.
great, and so, we have, so right now, I have to wrestle with, again, high anxiety that I'm experiencing, because I do not believe that these so-called vaccines are safe and probably not effective at all. And, so the way that I kind of have come to manage the anxiety, for example, if I think getting vaccinated, so I'm aware that they did animal studies concerning coronavirus vaccines connected to SARS-1 and MERS. They did animal experiments with cats and ferrets. And when they vaccinated the cats and the ferrets, two different situations, but they were okay when they got vaccinated. But when they got challenged or hit with the actual virus they were supposed to be protected from, they got really sick and most of them died. So they have done animal studies, but in this situation, they haven't done any animal studies with these messenger RNA vaccines. And they've had messenger RNA, it's not really that new. And so today, I have to tell myself basically that I'm going to try to avoid as best I can a vaccination. If, as I say metaphorically, they put a gun to my head, I might take it. I might not have a choice. They could, under certain circumstances, like you had, the kind of things that go on in other places, they can just give you the injection by force. And so, but again, the way I'm kind of dealing with that is I'm just simply saying to myself, if that's what happens, I'll deal with it as best that I can, and so to sorry about tangenting so much, but getting kind of personal with my situation.
Actually, I think that was key. I really enjoyed hearing how you handle yourself severe anxiety, and it was very helpful. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and again, what I'm doing, right now today is I'm imagining that at a certain point in time, I may be trapped. I can't avoid getting injected with messenger RNA, or the adenovirus, which is going to end up doing ultimately the same thing. But but at the same time, I'm going to think positively and try to do everything I can to personally avoid that. And I would just say in circumstances today, interestingly enough, and just to, so in order to manage anxiety, you have to know what the threat really is. is, so right now they've given the vaccination to maybe about half of the adults in the country. The people who've been lining up, trying to jump in front of other people in the line, let me get my jab. Great. And of course, to them, uh, getting the jab is, wow, now I can relax. I'm safe from this horrible virus, even though probably, unless you're over age 70 and you have 2.5 conditions, you're probably not in much jeopardy at all. But nonetheless, um, uh, so people have that kind of mentality because they fear that it's really, really dangerous. And what they keep doing is, the corporate media, which almost everybody listens to, you can't get away from it very much, and most people thrive on it. Um, what happens is, now, for example, now they're doing the thing with India. Oh my God, look at India. They're having to burn people, and uh, it's a new variant in India, and the emergency room. So what that does is it makes people here, when they hear that, become very, very afraid. Wow, let me get that vaccination, and finally I can relax and go back to normalcy
It
soon.
does appear that there is an unusual push to get people to take the vaccine. Now the Obamas are putting out advertisements saying, please take the vaccine.
Yes, and if you again, so here's what I would do. So again, what is the threat? And again, in a place like India where the poverty is unbelievable, you've got people living in places in India where they drink water, they know they're going to get cancer from drinking it, but where they say, what am I going to do? Die of thirst? Kind of a thing. It's horrible, the environmental degradation and the conditions of life in India. People are malnourished. Now, if you don't, those people aren't getting vitamin D3, they're not getting vitamin C, they don't have a nutritious diet. They're in very, very vulnerable to being taken out by many things, including COVID-19, if they are completely, their bodies have no real effective immune system. But again, the reality, the information, the data has shown that here in the United States, for example, and other first world countries, the people who are vulnerable are over age 70 with 2.5 preconditions that are pretty serious. Everybody else, you're not going to die. You may get sick, but how many times have you had a cold or had the flu? Um, and again, this is somewhat, perhaps potentially more dangerous in terms of what could happen down the road in some ways. But essentially, they had medications, therapeutics that were very safe and effective right from the get-go almost. You had hydroxychloroquine, which despite the discrediting of it, very safe and effective. And you had another antiviral, ivermectin. So you had medications that were effective. You had hardly anybody in danger of dying or getting, terribly damaged. And yet we've had this tremendous push to get vaccinated. They always sold that right from the beginning. We've got to get everybody vaccinated. Then we can maybe go back to normalcy when everybody's been vaccinated. And of course, that doesn't make any sense to me. And it also comments, it doesn't make any sense that if, for example, Stacy, you're all vaccinated and you come in contact with me who's not vaccinated and I'm not symptomatic, why would you have any fear of being around somebody who's not vaccinated? I mean, it's just, just like with the flu shot. When, not everybody gets the flu shot and some people come down with the flu. But again, there wasn't, I don't recall any great fear of being around somebody who didn't get a flu shot. But this is different. The whole thing there's a definite narrative, and it's as I said to a guy who I used to work on things with, who happens to believe that everybody should get the vaccination, and I tried to argue with him that maybe that's not such a good idea to be promoting it to people. But in any case, as I finally said, time will tell. And time will tell here what's going on. But they're making such a push, and it's not even, again, it's not logical. Why should people who are supposedly fully vaccinated have any kind of fear of somebody who's not vaccinated? And it was clear even in the very beginning that when the virus was very fresh, and normally, a virus will move from being its most toxic to being very, very mild, because the virus's goal is to move from host to host. And if you kill off too many people too soon, the virus dies, kind of like what happens with something like Ebola. But we're living in a situation where, I for example, look at the I look at the news. I tend to look at ABC Nightly News with David Muir. And that to me is a classic presentation where, he goes ahead and they have this music, this great music to get you, boom, 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 let me give you the news. And then, then they'll show you, oh, look at what's going on in India or someplace. It's horrible. It's horrible. And then they'll have some doctor, or somebody dressed as probably, saying, oh, we need more ventilators, or we need more of this. It's horrible. And they don't give you, and people don't have any context. They don't have any background in terms of what's even going on. And then, of course, they'll go to, let's hope, maybe they'll show Biden or today or saying, I hope everybody does the patriotic thing and gets their vaccinations. And then maybe we can have a nice cookout in the backyard for 4th of July. Isn't that nice, kids? Yeah. And again, the adult population here in the United States, by those who create the narratives, do view the population as being very childlike and easy to push and pull and manipulate. And they do a lot of it, again, through fear. And I know I've dwelled a lot on the management of anxiety, but in a sense, if there's a really serious threat and something could be done about it, you actually could do something. You can't, you can't avoid the knowledge, if it's available, of what the threat actually is. It's kind of like know who the enemy is, and then you might be able to plan rationally how to defend yourself from it. And like, again, with COVID, of course, right from the get-go, I knew, take the supplements, because your natural immune system, if that's way down, a lot of things could take you out if you're over 70 or 75 and you already have serious medical conditions that are quite advanced. And so, that's basically what I've done. And I personally, I arranged with my PCP who has antivirals. And I said, if I do come down with it, I want you to give me ivermectin or, the hydroxychloroquine cocktail. That's what I want to do, kind of a thing.
I as well heard an anecdote unsolicited from a doctor that hydroxychloroquine, I believe with zinc and D, was helping people, and that's all you needed, but he didn't understand why it was being said that we shouldn't use it.
Well, see, and this is why I'm so suspicious, because because if the game is to get everybody vaccinated with a messenger RNA, totally experimental, probably highly dangerous, um, shot. But that's your goal for whatever your goal really is. You would take down those medications because they're not giving people informed consent. Informed consent would be, look, um, we, so today it would be, okay, here's the situation. If you're over age 70 and you have some medical conditions, you are vulnerable. If you're age 50 or 45, you don't have that same vulnerability, especially if you don't have conditions. That's just part of information. And then you would say, we do have some medications which are very effective, ivermectin and the hydroxychloroquine cocktail. You could take those. They're safe and they're actually effective. Then you could say, well, now we have these very experimental messenger RNA vaccinations. And, the animal studies on these kind of vaccinations, when we were trying to develop a vaccine earlier in 2002, 2003, when we had SARS-1 and MERS, well, when we gave the vaccinations to the animals, they were okay after the vaccination, but then when they were challenged with the real virus, they just died or they were seriously damaged. Now, if you had that information, the actual risk, the fact that medications are available, and the reality of the vaccinations, you might say, no, you know what? I'll try some ivermectin, doctor. Let me go with that. It doesn't seem like I need to go down this vaccination road. But they discredited those medications on purpose in medical journals, which are controlled by, powers that really have some power. And they took it down. And I've heard reports that they've had a number of fires in factories which produce the ingredients for these antivirals. And again, so to me, it's like, not like a lot of people. Most of the people I come in contact with, it's just like, let me get my jab, let me get my two, and then we can, maybe take a trip or something. It'll be all good. But to me, it's like, based on my, I see the threat as being much different than what they understand. So in order to manage anxiety, we have to know what the threat is. You got to know the threat, and then you have to know how to cope with it if it does get you, and also to be able then to do everything in your power to prevent yourself from getting taken down by the threat. And of course, the way they've done it is it's been vaccination. Okay, I appreciate the opportunity to present, and I'll do everything in my power to get more proficient in screen sharing and not put you through this, Stacy, or myself, you know.
It
But
worked great, though. We're good partners. So it was
yeah.
wonderful, Dan. Thank you for bringing that all around. It's another full circle explanation that covers so much. I recommend listening to all of Dan's videos that we've collected here, but this was a really nice way of bringing a lot of things that we've discussed together. And thank you so much for your personal insights on that. And I will stop the recording. Thank you so much.